I didn't want us to miss a chance to sing with our awesome band. I look forward to hearing them every time I get the chance to. Yeah. So, after 2 weeks on active duty, and I'm about to go on some more, just like Reverend Christine did last week, I will be leaving as soon as the service is over. I will go upstairs, change clothes, head for the airport. Unlike Reverend Christine, I will not be going to a Unity convention in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I will be going to lovely Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Yeah. There's a reason they gave that corner of Oklahoma to the Indians and the field artillery. But, it's a chance to serve. When the Sergeant Major at the National Guard Bureau called me and asked me if I could do it, I just wanted to make sure that I could be here with you guys today and somehow still manage it. It's funny, when I realized the way that the timing was coming up, I just thought it would be sort of tongue-in-cheek if I talked about the peaceful warrior today. And that's a phrase that entered our lexicon with the book by the same name, or part of the same name, is The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman, written probably 25, 30 years ago now. And speaking of that kind of takes me back to a time 25 years ago. I was a sergeant. I was serving in Bravo Battery of the 3rd of the 144th Field Artillery at Culver City, California. That was my current guard unit when I was living in Los Angeles. And at the time, I had just gotten out of film school, and I had about 3 jobs. Besides being in the Guard, I also had a day job, and then in the evenings, I would work in some of the small theaters around Hollywood. And this one particular time in my life, I was working on a show that was about the Vietnam War. Particularly, it was about women's experience in the Vietnam War. It was, actually, I think everyone in the cast was a woman. One of them, it was Michelle Pfeiffer's younger sister, Dee Dee, but be that as it may. At one point, I think it was opening night, the director gave all of us these great big peace buttons. And they were, kind of 60s looking, and they were all, it was like a black background, and some of them had like a big fluorescent green peace symbol, and some of them had a big fluorescent orange one or fluorescent yellow one. So I got one of the green and black ones. And I used to have this tube bag made out of that real heavy-duty nylon. It was camouflaged, and I would take it with me when I went for duty for a weekend, just to have my toiletries and snacks and whatever in. So I put the peace button was about yay big around, so I put it on one end of my tube bag, right? So I'm showing up at drill this one night, and as usual, I was screeching into the parking lot about 2 minutes before formation. So I, grab my bag and run in, and they're already standing there, but they haven't been called to attention yet, so I'm not late yet, right? So I get up there, and I, stand next to the guy, like the first open spot. I put down my tube bag, and I stand at attention. They call us to attention. Well, the peace sign was facing forward, right, towards like the first sergeant, and then the commander walks up. Just a really great guy. He's one of the guys that Tom Austin, with his name, is a captain, and to this day, he's been one of the commanders I've had that I just really. He was a gentle heart, in uniform, but just a great guy. So he walks up, takes the formation from the first sergeant, looks around, and he looks over at me, and he just kind of breaks his. Sergeant Perry, you are a walking dichotomy. And I've always carried that with me. I am a walking dichotomy. So we are as peaceful warriors. The way that Dan Millman describes being a peaceful warrior, he says, it means to have a peaceful heart, but a warrior's spirit. And, maybe we have to unhook ourselves from what we think about the word war or warrior in order to really be able to appreciate what he's talking about. Yeah, and in Unity, that's kind of tough sometimes, and I've talked about that. I don't know if I've told you the story about one time when I was in my little church in Kissimmee, Florida, before it closed. And our spiritual leader, she was actually a licensed Unity teacher who was also an interfaith minister, was, up front leading the service. And she said, okay, now look in your hymnals to page, whatever it was, and we're going to sing this song. She said, I know you're going to be able to have fun with it because it's a tune everybody recognizes, but, we've got different words in Unity. It's done to the tune of Onward Christian Soldiers. But, of course, we know there are no Christian soldiers in Unity. I just went, just kind of got a laugh out of it because you have to. But what we're talking about is maybe more the idea of the warrior that was embodied by the Native Americans. And that's not necessarily the guy that, goes off on a raiding party and, comes back with horses and scalps. It's the guy who lives to serve. He lives to serve everyone in his tribe. He helps in whatever way he can, up to and including laying down his own life for them, if that's what it takes. That's a warrior. Someone who serves, someone who gives, someone who disciplines themselves to live in a manner that we can all look to and say, wow, that's the way it's done. It's not about being right. It's not about taking things. It's certainly not about taking land or oil or any of the other things that some nations have gone to war for over the years. I've kind of been in dialogue with one of our members, Eddie, about doing the prayer for protection, which was what that last song was based on, if any of you recognize that. The prayer for protection was written for soldiers going into combat. And that's one of the reasons that I've resisted that. But something Eddie said to me before I left to go to annual training was that, Reverend Charles, we are all going into spiritual combat. And the more I think about that, especially after having just immersed myself in the way of the peaceful warrior, I think she might be onto something there. And so we might do at least one of the forms of the prayer for protection here starting pretty soon. I kind of like the one that's done as a call and response, where maybe I would say, the light of God surrounds me, and you guys would say, I am the light of God. Right? Something more affirmative. The love of God unfolded. I am the love of God. So we might try doing that in the weeks that come. Because the truth is, many of us are involved in spiritual warfare every day. In all honesty, I am. I've been sober for 12 years, and, I still find new ways that I can overcome addiction of one form or another. I've been without caffeine now for about 5 weeks. I actually made it through an annual training drinking dandelion root tea. I didn't know that was possible, but it can be done, and I'm still working on the sugar thing, all right? As that one is in almost everything that you can find at the store these days, and certainly almost everything that they had at the chow hall. And there weren't a whole lot of choices. But I find, as did Dan, both the author and the hero of the book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, that in order to be conscious, in order to be aware, in order to really be present, we have to be present to what we're doing with our bodies and to what our bodies are trying to get us to do without us knowing it. And the same thing applies to our minds. We have so many different habits. The idea is to no longer be a creature of habit, but to be a creature of conscious choice. Not to do things because I've always done them that way, and not just to do things because I have an urge, because that would get ugly quick. But to do things intentionally because that's what I want as a child of God to be my next step, my next action, my next word, my next thought. I choose. Not my mind, which is, a dangerous place to go, especially after dark. Not my body, which can sometimes get me carried away into trouble. Me, the Christ of me, the watcher, the observer. The part of me that knows. The part of me that knows sometimes, not that knows the ABCs, that's kind of like my mind, but the part of me that knows when my mind has finally gone out to lunch. Like so many of us who grew up in conflicted circumstances, I often find my mind going into conflict. There's that other part of me, the part that I really want making the decisions, that will grab the leash and say, get out of there. You're going back down the dark. I don't need to do that. But in order to really be a peaceful warrior, I have to make that a constant practice. I have to be aware of what I'm thinking, not just letting my subconscious, which is filled with all kinds of junk, because it's filled with everything I've ever seen, ever read, ever heard, and ever done in my entire life. There's some dark stuff in there. I can't let that run the show. And for me to truly be the warrior that I can be, I have to be in charge of that. There is a certain amount of discipline that comes with being a warrior. And like Reverend Christine says, discipline is just remembering what we really want. It's funny, when we make value decisions for ourselves, we're really deciding, what do I want my life to be like? What do I really want my life to be like? And the thing is we really get to choose. Yes, we live in a very dynamic universe. And although, I, in my consciousness, can certainly make choices about how I respond to it, in a quantum field sort of thing, there are only so many atoms in this, and there's a whole lot more atoms out there. And all those other atoms get a vote in everything from the weather to, who shows up any given Sunday, to whether or not my commander's going to listen to me when I'm telling him something he really needs to hear. All those other atoms get a vote. So very often, my desires may end up being thwarted, or my satisfaction may not be where I want it to be, but those again are choices that I can make. And I, the observer that I am, can simply say, you know what? It is what it is. Rather than allowing my mind, my ego mind, to start fighting and kicking and screaming and demanding whatever it is it thinks it wants. Because a lot of the times what I think I want isn't really what I want at all. And some of the most painful places I have landed have been because I listened to what I thought I wanted rather than my higher self, either saying yes or no, or simply wait. So there's some keys to this whole thing, and a couple of them involve that choice to be conscious. When we are conscious about the simple ways that we live, and by that I mean, are we conscious about the things we're putting into our body? Are we conscious about the things we are putting into our mind? Are we choosing to watch the network news every night, or turning it off, or even unplugging the cable? Am I choosing to exercise myself in some way? Whether it's running, doing push-ups and sit-ups, like I've done for so many years, or doing yoga, as I've begun to do, or any number of other things out there. When I learn to discipline myself to do those things, then the discipline to show up as a warrior becomes easier and easier as time goes by. When I live at the mercy of my urges and my desires, even in small things, I risk getting swept away. It is very true that how we show up in anything is how we show up in everything. All of our choices matter. So as the story progresses in the way of the peaceful warrior, Dan, he starts out as a young man in college, a gymnast, and at one point he's involved in a pretty horrific motorcycle accident, and he doesn't know that he's ever going to be able to do his passion again. But in a very disciplined way, he goes back to work. Sometimes things happen in our lives and we think it's over, it's done. Now, in his case, his dedication, his discipline, and the work that he did brought him back to the level of being a world-class gymnast. But what's more important was that he did the work. At one point, another one of the warrior students of his teacher takes him off on a run, and this is after he had the surgery on his leg and he's trying to recover. And she runs him up and down these mountains around Berkeley and just about gets him to quit, but he doesn't. And when they stop, he says, "I didn't think I could keep up with you. You know, that probably wasn't really good for my leg." And she said, "It probably wasn't. But this wasn't about your leg, it was about your will. If you had not been willing to do this, you could not have gone further." And she didn't mean about his gymnastics. You know, in my other spiritual family, we have a saying, don't quit before the miracle happens. Because we see so many people who give up on their work. They step off of the warrior's path just before they get to where they could have gotten to. And some of them, it costs them their lives. For a lot of us, it simply costs a life in the kingdom of heaven when we step off of that path. Traditional Christianity tried to get people through life with the hope that once we lay this thing aside, everything is going to be beautiful and glorious forever. You can be miserable your whole life, but guess what? As long as you believe what we believe, when you die, it's going to be great. When we walk this path, when we live this way, when we truly become peaceful warriors, we have a way of living that is the kingdom of heaven right here, right now. It really begins with understanding that we have the ability to be unreasonably happy in everything, in every moment. And I love that phrase, unreasonably happy, because it's beyond reason, beyond anything our mind tells us. No matter what is happening in my life, I have the ability to be happy if I choose it right here, right now. If I simply say to the universe, I surrender. Oddly enough, that is the way of the warrior. to let go of whatever petty desire I thought I had, of whatever judgment I had, of whatever dream I thought I had that could outdream the universe. Don't I know that God loves me? Don't I know that somewhere on the other side of whatever I thought was the end is a whole new beginning that is more wonderful than anything I could have imagined? If I keep doing the deal, if I keep remembering to love, if I keep opening my heart, surrendering to God, to this moment, to this universe, living in the here and now instead of the past or a future that will never be, I can be happy right here, right now. I can open my heart and love right here and right now. I can have a heart of peace and the spirit of a warrior. So can you. So can you. See you next week.